I was standing in the center of the nursery on the 3rd floor, my body rigid with fear. My cheap gray uniform was plastered to my skin, 2 dark, wet circles spreading rapidly across my chest. It was humiliating, a physical leak of the grief I carried, the milk my body insisted on making, milk my own daughter would never drink. Little Nico was latched to me, his small mouth working with a desperation that had broken my heart. His thin, agonizing wails had finally, after hours, softened to quiet, gasping grunts and the wet sound of swallowing. Then the door was thrown open. It crashed against the interior wall with a sound like a gunshot. I flinched, pulling Nico tighter against me. Luca Belandi stood framed in the doorway, a storm of controlled fury. He was the youngest boss in Chicago history, a man whispered about in shadows, and he was staring at his housemaid, who had broken his cardinal rule. His eyes were not just dark, they were like polished obsidian knives. He was dressed in a black tailored suit that seemed to absorb all the light in the room, making the soft, pearl gray walls look cheap. The 2 bodyguards behind him were mountains, their presence instantly sucking the air from the room. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a pale scar across his jaw, lunged forward. His hand vanished inside his jacket. "Boss!" he growled, his voice thick with disbelief and rage. "What is she—" "Do not move." The words tore out of my throat, raw and shaking, but absolute. "You will scare him." The scarred man froze, his eyes wide. Luca Belandi did not move, but he lifted one perfectly manicured hand, barely an inch. It was enough. The guard stepped back, his face a mask of confusion. My heart was a trapped bird, beating against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. This was it. I was a 27-year-old widow from the South Side. I would be fired. That was the best-case scenario. People who crossed Luca Belandi, who invaded his private, forbidden spaces, usually just disappeared. But the crying had been going on for 6 hours. 6 solid hours of a thin, glassy shriek that cut through the expensive insulation of this Lake Michigan mansion. It was a sound I knew in my bones. It was the sound of pure, helpless agony. I was supposed to be scrubbing the kitchen floors on the 1st floor, minding my own business, but that sound had been a physical rope, pulling me up the grand staircase, past the silent, heavy doors of the 2nd floor, to this forbidden territory, the 3rd floor. I lost my own daughter, Nova, 4 months ago. I sat in a cold beige hospital room and watched her tiny lungs give up. My body, stupid and stubborn, had not gotten the message. It had produced milk for a child who was gone, and for 4 months, that milk had been a constant, painful, wet reminder of my failure. Hearing Nico's suffering, hearing that specific cry of starvation and allergic reaction while my own body was literally leaking the cure, was a torture I could not endure for 1 more second. Breaking the rule was not a choice. It was an imperative. Now, the architect of that rule was stepping inside the room. Luca Belandi moved with a predator's grace. He reached back, his gaze never leaving me, and quietly pushed the heavy door closed. The latch clicked shut, a sound of finality that sealed the 3 of us inside. The guards were gone. The room shrank. The silence that followed was immense. It was heavy, electric, the suffocating quiet that comes in the deep ocean, right before something massive attacks. He did not look at my face. His eyes were fixed on the junction where his son was feeding, where my soaked uniform was bunched up. His face was unreadable, carved from hard Italian marble. When he finally spoke, his voice was not loud. It was worse. It was a textured whisper, a rumble full of controlled violence that vibrated in my very bones. "Do you know what you are doing?" I held his gaze. I was terrified, but I was also right. In this one specific moment, my certainty was greater than his power. "Saving your son," I said. My voice was clearer this time, cutting through the expensive air. I watched the muscles in his jaw work, a tiny, furious rhythm. He was at war with himself, I could see it. The boss, the father, the man of absolute rules, the man witnessing a biological miracle. Under my hands, Nico's small body, which had been rigid with distress for hours, finally went limp. He relaxed against me. His frantic, painful sucking eased into a steady, rhythmic pull. A tiny clenched fist that had been beating at my chest uncurled, his fingers resting against my skin. His mottled, red-patched face began to return to a normal color. He was safe. He was full. The room was a fortress of wealth. The air smelled of polished walnut from the custom-built crib and the faint, clean scent of the pearl gray paint. On the massive mantelpiece, a silver-framed photograph of his late wife, Isabella, watched us. She was beautiful, smiling, frozen in time. This room was a shrine, filled with every expensive solution money could buy. Stacks of imported, hypoallergenic formula sat uselessly on the changing table. They were poison to him. Luca Bellandi's gaze flickered to the heavy gold watch on his wrist. It was a meaningless habit, a gesture of control in a situation he could not control. His entire empire, his arsenal of men and weapons, his ruthless reputation, all of it was completely useless here. He could not stop his son's body from rejecting the formula. He could not stop the screams. But I could. The silence stretched again, and this time, I had to be the one to fill it. The truth was the only currency I had left. My name is Aisha Monroe. The words rushed out, tumbling over each other. I'm 27 years old. I live on the South Side. I had to take a deep breath. The next part feeling like swallowing glass. I had a daughter, Nova. She passed away 4 months ago. I looked down at the sleeping child in my arms, his face peaceful for the first time today. My body, it did not stop. I looked back up, forcing myself to meet those terrifying eyes. I still have milk. It was not an explanation. It was a confession. I was not attacking his child. I was not defying his power. I was doing the one thing his millions could not. Luca Bellandi looked at me for what felt like a full year. The calculation in his eyes was cold and terrifying. He was reassessing. He was no longer seeing me as the help, the invisible woman who scrubbed his toilets. He was seeing me as something else, an asset, a threat, a dangerous necessity. When he spoke again, his voice was stripped bare of all pretense, all menace. It was just raw. What do you want, Aisha? It was a test. He expected a price. Money, protection, a new car, a house. He expected me to leverage this moment. I shook my head. A small, tired movement. I looked away from his intense stare and down at the child, his chest rising and falling in a steady, healthy rhythm. I want nothing, I whispered, only for him to not be in pain. That was the truth. It was the purest truth I had ever spoken. And it was the one answer he was not prepared for. It shattered the tension in the room, landing like a stone in a silent pond. He studied me, his head tilted slightly. He saw the soaked, cheap uniform. He saw the dark circles of exhaustion under my eyes. He saw the genuine, profound relief that the child was no longer screaming. Luca Bellandi, the man who ruled Chicago's shadows, stepped back from me. He broke a lifetime of ironclad rules, a code of violence and mistrust. He gave one sharp, decisive nod. "Continue," he commanded. The word was barely a whisper, but it landed with the force of a gavel. He turned, his movements precise, and left the nursery, closing the heavy door softly behind him. I was left alone in the pearl gray silence, still holding his son. The terror began to fade, replaced by a strange, humming clarity. I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life and his had been altered forever. I sat there in that opulent nursery, the heavy silence broken only by the quiet, rhythmic sound of Nico feeding. My world had just tilted on its axis, spinning off into some unknown territory. How did I even get here? It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been a few months. It started. As everything truly terrible in my life seemed to, with money, or the precise, suffocating lack of it. The bills from Nova's hospitalization were a mountain of sterile white paper that had buried me alive. They were stacked high on my tiny, peeling kitchen table in the South Side, smelling of sharp ink and impossible, terrifying numbers, tens of thousands of dollars. The American medical system does not care about your grief. It just wants its payment on time. I was working 2 jobs, scrubbing floors in an office building downtown and serving bitter coffee to commuters. And I was still drowning. Then I heard about the Belandi job. A friend of a friend knew someone who worked for the agency. "They pay cash," she had whispered, her eyes wide, as if the name itself was dangerous. "Big money, Aisha. But you see nothing. You hear nothing. It is good pay for good silence." I did not care if I was cleaning up for the devil himself. I needed that money. I needed to bury those bills just as I had been forced to bury my daughter. My interview was not with Luca Belandi. Men like him do not interview the household staff. I met Matteo. He was the consigliere, the chief advisor, though I did not know that specific word for him then. He was polite, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car. And he looked at me with eyes that were not really eyes. They were scanners. They measured my worth, my reliability, and my potential for trouble. He asked me very few questions about cleaning. He asked me if I had family in Chicago. I told him no, not anymore. He asked me if I was reliable. I told him I was desperate. He must have liked those answers. He hired me on the spot. He gave me the tour of the first 2 floors, his polished shoes making no sound on the imported marble. He ended the tour in the massive, echoing main hall. "Your duties are the first and second floors only," he had said, his voice smooth and final like polished stone. He pointed a long, manicured finger toward the grand, sweeping staircase that led up into the shadows. "You do not, under any circumstances, go to the 3rd floor." It was a command, not a suggestion. Later that week, I was scrubbing the foyer marble on my hands and knees. I saw the official staff rulebook left on a hall table. It was a thick, leather-bound volume. On the very first page, in bold, capitalized letters, "Do not go to the 3rd floor." I remember snorting, a quiet, bitter sound lost in the huge space. What was he hiding up there, a dragon? A vault full of gold bullion? I truly did not care. For the kind of money he was paying me, I would happily pretend the 3rd floor did not even exist. The house itself was a character. It was less a home and more a beautiful, cold fortress perched right on the edge of Lake Michigan. The entire back wall of the main living area was glass, stretching from the floor to the 20-foot ceiling, looking out onto a vast, churning expanse of gray and green water. It was stunning, but it felt terribly exposed. I saw the diagrams once, left out on a desk during a security systems check, a complex map of the property, covered in lines for cameras, sensors, and escape routes. I noted the thick, steel-lined box drawn on the 3rd floor, near the nursery wing, a safe room. It sent a chill right down my spine. Luca Belandi himself was a ghost. For the first few weeks, I only saw the evidence of him, the traces he left behind. I would clean his massive, dark wood study late at night, long after he had left it. The air would still be thick with the expensive smell of his cigars and the sharp, bitter aroma of fresh espresso. He always left one small porcelain cup on his desk, drained, a dark sludge at the bottom. Sometimes, usually very late, when I was finishing the downstairs floors, I would hear the piano. It was never a full song, just fragments, dark, angry chords that seemed to shake the walls, or a high, thin melody so achingly sad it made my chest physically hurt. He was a man defined by his heritage. I saw it on the walls, in the rows of oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who looked down at me with disapproval. I saw it on his own skin, just once. He was walking through the kitchen early one morning, wearing only a pair of black sweatpants. His entire forearm, from wrist to elbow, was a dense tapestry of ink, a complex family tree. Names and dates I could not read, all twisted around a severe, dark cross. He was bound to his past. a legacy that was clearly both his shield and his prison. And then there was my own private, humiliating hell. My body's betrayal. It is a cruel joke of biology. My grief was sharp, mental, a constant ache in my soul. But my body was on its own stupid, biological schedule. It still thought I was a mother. I would be scrubbing a floor or washing crystal glasses, and I would feel the familiar, unwelcome tingling, the sudden hot rush of milk descending. I would have to drop everything and run to the staff bathroom, my cheap uniform soaked, tears of pure humiliation and rage stinging my eyes. I was leaking. I was wasting what Nova had needed so desperately. I was spending money I did not have on boxes of nursing pads, another ridiculous expense in a country where just existing costs a fortune. I was a walking, grieving, leaking tragedy. The only person in that entire mansion who showed me any real warmth was Mrs. Alvarez. She was the head housekeeper, a stern, older woman with kind eyes who had clearly seen everything and said almost nothing about any of it. She pulled me aside on my first day, her hand surprisingly strong on my arm. "Walk soft. Listen hard. Say little," she advised, her dark eyes looking right into me. "This is a house of quiet men. You just be a quiet woman." She was the only human touch in that cold palace of glass and steel. Then, Nico, the heir, the new Belandi. I had only glimpsed him, a tiny bundle carried by a professional, uniformed nurse. His birth was the reason the house was on even higher alert, the guards even more tense. The whispers started about 2 weeks ago. The baby was sick, not just fussy, dangerously sick. I saw Dr. Patel, the pediatrician, a small, worried man, rushing in and out of the house, his face growing tighter with frustration each time. He was a man of science, but he was clearly losing this battle. I heard the conversations Mateo had on the telephone, his voice low and tight with anger. "Another one he vomited this one too. Get the shipment from Germany here tonight." They tried every formula, the most expensive, the most scientific, the ones shipped in from Europe and Japan, the hypoallergenic brands that cost hundreds of dollars for a single small can. It did not matter. Nico's small body rejected them all. I saw the evidence in the laundry room, piles of sheets stained, tiny, expensive onesies marked with a pale, angry red rash. His small stomach was in knots. He was starving. And then, today, the crying. It started in the morning, around 10 o'clock, a normal, fussy cry from a newborn, but it did not stop. It escalated. By noon, it was a thin, panic shriek that seemed to cut through the thick walls. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it was a sound that did not even seem human. It was the sound of a small animal caught in a steel trap. It was the raw, unending sound of pure agony. I was on my hands and knees in the kitchen, scrubbing the grout between the tiles. Mrs. Alvarez was by the sink, wringing her hands, her face pale. The guards outside the door were pacing, their presence making the air crackle. The whole 3-story house was vibrating with this one. Tiny, tortured sound. 6 hours. He had been screaming without pause for 6 solid hours. I could not take it. I could not be a party to it. I stood up, my legs shaking. "Mrs." Alvarez looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Aisha, no, it is not your place." I did not listen to her. I walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding a drumbeat against my ribs. I was a housemaid. I was nobody. But I was also a mother, and my body was full of the answer. I passed Mateo in the main hall. He put a hand out, blocking my path to the stairs. "The first floor only, Miss Monroe. Go back to your duties." "He is starving," I said, my voice shaking but fierce. "He is in pain. Listen to him. Can you not hear him?" He looked at me, his scanner eyes cold, trying to figure out my angle, my motive. I just pushed past his arm. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my cheap shoes silent on the thick carpet runner. I found the nursery. The door was closed, but the screaming was overwhelming. as if the wood itself was vibrating. I did not knock. I just turned the handle and opened the door. The nurse on duty was in the corner, her hands over her ears, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. Nico was in his crib, his face a terrifying shade of purple-red, his tiny limbs rigid, his mouth open in that unending, silent shriek because he had no air left to make sound. I did not hesitate. I scooped him up. His small body was hot, damp with sweat. I sat in the plush rocking chair, unbuttoned my uniform, and did the only thing I could. And now, sitting in the heavy silence after Luca Belandi had left me, I rocked his son, my defensive humor, the little private jokes about dragons and gold vaults. It all felt so childish and stupid. This was not a joke. This was life and death. I had a choice. Obey the rules of a silent, violent world built by men like Luca Belandi, or obey the rules of humanity, the fundamental law of a mother. I looked down at the peaceful child, his belly full, his breathing finally deep and even. I had made my choice, and I would face whatever came next. When I was left alone, I did not know how long I sat there. I just held him, this child who was not mine, and rocked him in the pearl-gray silence. My mind was empty of everything except the small weight in my arms and the sound of his breathing. It might have been 20 minutes or an hour before the door opened again, this time without knocking, but softly. Luca Belandi returned, and he was not alone. Matteo, the consigliere, was behind him, his face pale and rigid, his eyes fixed on me as if I were a live bomb. Mrs. Alvarez was also there, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "She will stay here," Luca said to Matteo, his voice low and clipped. His eyes were on his son. "Move her things from the staff quarters. She will take the guest room adjacent to the nursery." Matteo looked like he was going to be physically ill. "Boss, if I may," he began, his voice a strained whisper. "A background check, a full medical panel, the security implications." "She saved his life, Matteo," Luca cut him off, the words sharp as steel. "You brought me every specialist, every imported formula, and Dr. Patel, none of them stopped the screaming. She did." He turned his gaze to me. It was cold, analytical. "Dr. Patel is on his way. He will draw your blood. You will sign a medical release, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement so thick it could stop a bullet. You are now officially on the 3rd floor. This is a medical arrangement." Matteo's jaw clenched, but he nodded. He understood an order. "I will have the papers drawn up immediately." Mrs. Alvarez just looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of pity and awe. My life changed in that instant. My gray, cheap uniform was gone, replaced by soft cotton clothes provided for me. My small, damp room in the basement was gone. I was moved into a guest suite that was larger than my entire South Side apartment. It had its own bathroom, stocked with expensive, unscented soaps, and a window that overlooked the turbulent gray waters of Lake Michigan. I was no longer a housemaid. I was a prisoner, a necessity, a living prescription. My new life was measured in 3-hour increments. That was the schedule. Day and night. Nico needed to eat every 3 hours. I started a logbook, the same kind I had kept for Nova. A small, simple notebook where I wrote down the time of each feeding, the duration, any changes in his skin, his mood, his breathing. It was a clinical, detached record. It was the only way I could process what was happening without letting my grief swallow me whole. It was the only way I could pretend this was a job. The house was quiet, but the world outside was not. The paparazzi had already been sniffing around the Belandi compound for weeks, ever since Isabella's sudden death and the birth of the heir. They must have photographed the multiple ambulances, the frantic visits from Dr. Patel. Now, the quiet was just as suspicious as the screaming had been. The whispers started online, on the dark, gossipy blogs that tracked families like the Belandis, Belandi heir in critical condition. Then, mystery woman saves the Don's son, and the one that made my blood run cold, Belandi weakened by crying baby, rivals taking note. Luca was aware of the rumors. The tension in the house thickened. The guards doubled at the gates. But the nursery, in the middle of the night, became a strange, isolated bubble of peace. At first, I was alone during the 3 o'clock in the morning feeding, just me and Nico and the quiet hum of the air purifier. Then, on the third night, the door opened and Luca Belandi walked in. He did not turn on the main lights. He just stood in the shadows by the door, watching us. I was sitting in the rocker, Nico feeding quietly in my arms. I did not say anything. I was terrified to break the spell. He just stood there for 20 minutes, silent. And then he left. The next night, he returned. This time, he did not stand. He sat in the large, upholstered armchair in the corner of the room, across from me. The silence was heavy, but different. It was not the threatening silence of our first meeting. It was a shared, exhausted silence. "He looks better," Luca said, his voice rough with lack of sleep. "He is," I replied, my eyes on the baby. "His color is good. He's gaining weight." We sat like that for several nights, him in his chair, me in mine, 2 ghosts in a room, watching a baby eat. One night, around 4 o'clock in the morning, when the entire city of Chicago was asleep, he spoke again. Isabella, his mother. She wanted him so badly. I did not know what to say. I just nodded, holding Nico a little tighter. "She picked out everything," he continued, his voice hollow as he stared at the pearl-gray walls. "The paint, the crib from Italy. She read all the books. She did everything right." "This was not her fault," I said softly. "It was not anything she did. It is just biology. Sometimes it is just terrible. Random biology." He looked at me then. Truly looked at me. His eyes were not the eyes of a mafia boss. They were the eyes of a widower. They were the eyes of a man who was just as lost as I was. "You lost a child," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes," I whispered. "My daughter, Nova." "Grief," he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth. "It is a room you get locked in. You think you will never leave." "You do not," I replied, the truth burning in my throat. "You just learn how to live in it. You open a window." A strange, fragile trust was being built in those dark, quiet hours. We were 2 people who should have been worlds apart, brought together by the most fundamental and heartbreaking of human experiences, loss. My new proximity to Nico meant I saw everything, and I noticed something the nurse, and even Dr. Patel, had missed. Nico was feeding well. He was sleeping, but he still had a faint, angry red rash on his back and the backs of his legs. "It is the detergent," I said to Mrs. Alvarez one morning in the 3rd-floor laundry room. She frowned. "It is the best hypoallergenic. No perfumes." "It still has a chemical smell." I insisted. I held one of the organic cotton onesies to my nose. "It is sharp. Nova had this. Her skin was sensitive to everything." I went to Luca. It was the first time I'd ever sought him out. I found him in his study, the room smelling of cigars and old books. "I need new detergent," I said. He looked up from a stack of papers, his brow furrowed. "For Nico's clothes," I clarified, "just simple, organic Castile soap, and all his linens need to be boiled in plain water. Whatever is on them now is irritating his skin." He stared at me for a second, then he nodded to Matteo, who was standing in the corner. "Get her what she needs. Get it now." We re-washed every blanket, every sheet, every item of clothing. Within 24 hours, the rash was gone. Nico's skin was smooth and clear. My power in that house, my value, had just shifted again. I was not just the milk, I was the one who was watching. But as my position grew stranger, the dangers from the outside grew stronger. I was walking down the main hall, carrying a stack of the newly cleaned linens, when I heard raised voices from the study. Luca's and Matteo's. The door was cracked open just an inch. I should have kept walking. "Mrs." Alvarez's voice was in my head. "Walk soft. Listen hard. Say little." "They are pushing." "Luca," Matteo said, his voice tight with a stress I had never heard before. "The Rinaldi Syndicate, they want the Port Alliance signed." I told them no. Luca's voice was a low growl. "I will not have that filth coming through my docks. I do not care what they offer." "They know the baby was sick," Matteo pressed. "They know you were distracted. They are interpreting your no as a temporary negotiating tactic. They will not stop, boss. They are moving product, people. They need a new route, and they want yours." "My answer is final." Luca snapped. "I will not be in the business of selling human beings. We are done." I hurried away, my heart pounding. Rinaldi Syndicate, human trafficking. These were not words. They were threats, and they were connected to Nico's vulnerability. The threat was not just outside. 2 days later, I went to my own room to get my notebook. In the clean, folded stack of my own laundry, placed on my bed by one of the other maids, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was not a note. It was a warning. Just 4 words, cut from magazine letters and pasted onto a blank card. "Stay off the 3rd floor." I dropped it as if it were on fire. My blood ran cold. This was not from the Rinaldis. This was from someone inside. Someone who had access to my private room. Someone who had watched me move from the basement to the suite. Someone who hated what I had become. I was terrified. I could have packed my bag, gone to Luca and told him I was done. I could have run back to the relative safety of my South Side apartment. But as I stood there, shaking, I heard it, the faint, stirring cry from the nursery next door. Nico was waking up. It was time for his 10 o'clock feeding. I looked at the note. I looked at the door to the hall. I smoothed my shirt, picked up the note, and walked out of my room. I went to the nursery. I was staying. I was choosing to stand in the fire. That evening, Luca found me in the nursery, writing in my logbook. "Matteo has drawn up a new contract for you," he said, standing in the doorway. "You are no longer on the house staff payroll. You are being retained as a pediatric care consultant. The salary is a nurse's salary, full medical insurance, hazard pay." He was putting a price on it. He was trying to make it a clean business transaction. I closed the notebook. I looked up at him, the most powerful and dangerous man in Chicago. "I do not need a new contract, Mr. Belandi," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am not doing this for a salary. I am not your consultant." He frowned, confused. "Then what do you want?" "I want him to be safe," I said. "I want him to grow up. That is all. You do not need to pay me for that. You just need to keep him safe." I had, once again, given him the one answer he could not process. He thought the note in my laundry basket was a negotiation tactic. He thought I was leveraging my position. He looked at me for a long time, the conflict raging in his eyes, the boss versus the father. "They are not mutually exclusive, Aisha," he said softly. "You will be paid, and I will keep him safe. I will keep you both safe." He left me then, but I could not shake the feeling that coiled in my stomach. I was worried about the Rinaldis. I was worried about the traitor inside this house. But most of all, I was worried about my own heart. I was looking at the photograph of Isabella on the mantel, her beautiful, smiling face. Nico was her son, not mine. Was I saving him, or was I just trying to replace the daughter I had lost? The question was a heavy, suffocating weight, and I did not have an answer. The fragile peace on the 3rd floor lasted exactly 2 days. 2 days of the 3-hour schedule, of the quiet rocking, of the clinical logbook. 2 days of me pretending I was just an employee and Luca Belandi pretending he was just an employer. Then Matteo summoned me to the study. He did not ask me to sit. He was standing by the massive, dark desk, his face a mask of controlled disgust. Luca was not there. It was just us. "You have become a problem, Miss Monroe," he said, his voice flat. He turned a tablet screen toward me. I did not understand what I was seeing at first. It was my face, a picture from my old deleted social media profile, back when Nova was alive, back when I used to smile. It was plastered on a dark, ugly website. The headline was cruel. Belandi's new heir suckles at the help. My stomach turned. I felt the blood drain from my face. He scrolled. There were more crude, photoshopped images, memes. One depicted me as a caricature, a racist drawing of a mammy holding a white baby. The comments underneath were a cesspool of classism, racism, and vile speculation. They called me the Belandi wet nurse. "This is what happens when the walls are breached," Matteo said, his voice like ice. "The Rinaldis, our competitors. They are having a field day with this. They are leaking it to every dark blog in Chicago. They are painting the boss as weak, distracted, incapable. A man who cannot even feed his own son without resorting to this." He gestured vaguely at me, as if I was something unclean. "I did not ask for this," I whispered, my hands shaking. The note left in my room. "Stay off the 3rd floor. It was a warning from an internal enemy. This was an attack from the outside." You did not have to ask," Matteo snapped. "Your existence here is the problem. You are a liability." I left the study, my skin crawling. I felt exposed, violated, and filthy. I was a meme. My private grief, my body's strange functions, had been twisted into a joke to weaken a mafia boss. I needed air. I needed to see the sky, to feel something real outside of this fortress of glass and secrets. I asked Luca, my voice trembling. I expected him to say no. To my surprise, he agreed. "You will take one of the guards," he commanded. "Leo, you will go to the public market, 1 hour. Do not speak to anyone." The Lincoln Square Farmers Market was a blast of noise and color. The smell of fresh peaches and damp earth, people laughing, arguing over tomatoes, living normal lives. It felt like a different planet. Leo, my guard, stayed 10 feet behind me, a silent, grim shadow in a dark suit. I just wanted to buy a piece of fruit, to feel normal for 5 minutes. I was standing at a stall, pretending to inspect apples, when a woman bumped into me, hard. "Oh, excuse me," she said. She was plain, mousy, with tired eyes and brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple jacket and jeans. She did not look like she belonged to this world of mafia wives and luxury. "It is okay," I said, trying to move away. She put her hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Aisha Monroe," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. I froze. "My name is Detective Erin Walsh," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd, never quite looking at me. "Chicago Police, Human Trafficking Unit." My heart stopped. "Police?" "I cannot talk to you," I said, pulling my arm away. Leo was watching the crowd, but he had not noticed her yet. "You are living in the devil's heart, Aisha," Walsh said, her voice sharp, cutting. "You are closer to Luca Belandi than anyone. You are in that nursery, in his private wing. You see things, you hear things." "I do not know what you're talking about," I stammered, grabbing a random apple, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "The Rinaldi Syndicate," she said, ignoring me. "They move people through the ports. So does Belandi. They are just fighting over the territory. These men are monsters. They sell children." "No," I said, a sudden, fierce protectiveness rising in me. "He does not. He refused." Walsh's eyes finally snapped to mine, sharp and sudden. "He refused what?" I realized my mistake. I had said too much. "I have to go." She grabbed my wrist again. "He is using you. You are just a tool to him. But you can do something good. You can save people. Real people." She slipped something small, hard and cold into the pocket of my jeans. "A burner phone. The number is already in it. Call me. Tell me what you hear. Help me take them all down." She vanished into the crowd before Leo even looked our way. I went back to the mansion, the small, heavy phone feeling like a block of ice against my leg. My world was collapsing. The Rinaldis, Walsh, the blogs. I was trapped between 2 warring armies and a police detective who thought I was sleeping with the enemy. That night, the tension in the house was a living thing, a coiled snake in every hallway. I was rocking Nico for his 2 o'clock in the morning feeding. He was fussy, turning his head, refusing to latch. Then he arched his back and made a sound that terrified me, a high-pitched, thin wheeze. He was not choking on milk. He was struggling to breathe. I leaped up, my heart in my throat. I looked around the room, frantic. What was different? Nothing. The air smelled clean. I ran my fingers along the windowsill. No drafts. Then I saw it. The small electric air purifier in the corner, the one that was supposed to keep the air pristine. The indicator light, usually a calm blue, was flashing a faint, angry red. I ripped the cover off. The filter inside was thick, choked with a gray, powdery dust. It was completely clogged. Construction, no. It was just neglect, in all the chaos, with all the staff changes. No one had thought to check it. I tore the dirty filter out, throwing it to the floor. Nico was turning a dusky, terrifying color. I held him close, patting his back, speaking in a low, calm voice I did not feel. "It is okay, baby. It is okay. Breathe. Just breathe." The door flew open. Luca stood there, his face ashen. He must have heard the wheezing on the baby monitor. "What is wrong?" he demanded, rushing forward. The filter, I gasped, pointing. "It is clogged. He's breathing dust." Luca moved. He did not panic. He grabbed the emergency oxygen canister kept in the closet, the one for medical emergencies. He twisted the knob, and a soft hiss filled the room. He held the small mask near Nico's face. I held Nico, rocking him, whispering as the clean, pure oxygen filled his tiny, struggling lungs. After a minute, the wheezing softened. His color returned. His small body relaxed against my chest. Luca was breathing heavily. His hands clenched at his sides. He looked at me, and the expression in his eyes was something I had never seen before. It was not gratitude. It was awe, as if I had just performed some kind of miracle, instead of just noticing a dirty filter. You knew," he whispered. "You saw it." "I am a mother," I said, my voice shaking. "You learn to see everything." The next day, Matteo came to Luca. I was in the nursery, and they were in the hallway, their voices sharp. "This is the end of it, boss," Matteo said, his voice low and furious. "She is a target. The Rinaldis know about her. The police are sniffing. She cannot stay here. We can get milk from a bank. We can have it screened, delivered." "No," Luca's voice was absolute, final. "It is too dangerous," Matteo insisted. "She is a weakness. She is not family, she is staff. She is the only reason my son is alive." Luca's voice dropped to a lethal growl. "She saved him from the allergy. She saved him from the dust. She sees what we do not. She stays under my protection. This conversation is over." I heard Matteo storm off. The rift was real. Luca had chosen me, the housemaid, over the advice of his consigliere. That night, I pulled the burner phone from under my mattress. My hands were shaking. Detective Walsh was wrong. Luca was not selling people. He was refusing to, but he was still a criminal. He was still the man the world called a monster. I was in a moral gray area so vast I could not see the edges. But I knew one thing. The Rinaldis were trafficking people. They were the ones who had flooded the blogs, who were putting this target on my back and on Nico's. I made the call. "Detective Walsh," I whispered into the phone. "Aisha, I knew you would call. What do you have?" "I do not have anything on Luca Belandi," I said, the lie tasting bitter. "I will not betray him. I will not put Nico at risk. But the Rinaldis, they are the ones you want. They are angry because Luca stopped one of their shipments. They are the ones moving people." There was a long silence. "You are playing a dangerous game, girl." "I am just trying to keep a baby safe," I said, and ended the call. 2 days later, I was forced into another trial. A family dinner. Luca's great aunt, Zia Rosa, was visiting. She was the true matriarch of the Belandi family, a terrifying woman in her 70s, dressed entirely in black, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Luca insisted I join them at the table. It was a test, for me and for his family. Zia Rosa stared at me throughout the entire meal. her black eyes missing nothing. Finally, over dessert, she spoke. "So, you are the, help," she said, her Italian accent thick. She said the word help like it was something she had found on the bottom of her shoe. "You provide such an intimate service. For my nephew." The table went silent. Matteo looked at his plate, and Luca's jaw tightened. I put down my fork, my heart pounding. I met her gaze. "Zia Rosa," I said, my voice soft but clear. "Your nephew's son was dying. The doctors could not help him. All the money in Chicago could not help him. I could. It is not a service. It is motherhood." She stared at me, her expression unreadable, then a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Eat your cake, child," she said, and turned back to her espresso. I had passed. The fragile peace of that victory did not last. That night, just after midnight, the alarms went off. Not a soft chime. A shrieking, piercing wail that ripped me from a light sleep. A red strobe light on the nursery wall began to flash. I ran to Nico's crib. He was awake, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open to scream. The intercom on the wall crackled. "Aisha!" It was Matteo's voice, strained with adrenaline. "Intruder, backyard, kitchen entry. Code red, get to the safe room, now go." My training kicked in. I grabbed Nico, wrapped him in a blanket. I grabbed the emergency go bag that had been packed and placed by the door ever since I arrived. Diapers, water, formula that I knew he could not drink, and a small oxygen tank. I ran out of the nursery and to the wall at the end of the hall. I slammed my palm against a piece of decorative molding. The wall panel slid open, revealing a thick, gray steel door. I punched in the code Luca had made me memorize. The door hissed open. I scrambled inside the small, dark space. It was lined with steel, with a bench, more water, and a ventilation system. I hit the large, red button on the inside. The steel door hissed shut, and a series of heavy bolts shot into place. It was the first time I had ever been inside. The silence was absolute, total, suffocating. There was no sound from the house, no alarms, no shouting, just me, and the sound of my own terrified breathing, and the small, whimpering cries of the baby in my arms. The external threat was no longer a blog post or a detective. It was in the house. Hours seemed to pass. I just sat on the bench, holding Nico, humming the gospel songs my mother used to sing to me, trying to keep us both from screaming. Finally, I heard a specific metallic knock on the outside of the door. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap. The code. I unsealed the door. It hissed open. Luca stood there, and he was in a black t-shirt, his face grim, his knuckles scraped and bloody. His left hand was wrapped in a crude bandage. "It is over," he said, his voice rough. "He is gone." I stepped out into the hallway, my legs weak. "Who?" "A Rinaldi scout," he said, walking me back to the nursery. He checked the windows, the closet. He came in through a kitchen window. The new pressure sensors on the glass worked. Matteo's men caught him in the yard. He flexed his bandaged hand. "Are you okay?" I asked, looking at the blood. "It is nothing." He sank into the armchair, the one he always sat in, and put his head in his hands. He looked defeated. "They want this Port Alliance so badly," and he said, his voice muffled. "They want me to look the other way. They move people. Aisha. Women from Eastern Europe, children from South America. They sell them like cattle." He looked up, and his eyes were haunted. "I told them no. I told them I will not be that man." He took a deep breath. "My mother," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was part of a deal, an arranged marriage between my father and her family in Sicily. Peace. She was 17. She was a piece of property." He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the dark lake. She hated him. She hated this life of polite violence, of rules and blood. When I was 10 years old, she ran away. She just vanished. To protect herself, to be free. He turned to look at me, and the full weight of his legacy was in his eyes. I understand what it is to be a woman trapped in a deal. I will not sell anyone. Aisha, I will not trade human lives to buy myself peace. I do not care what it costs me. I finally understood. This was not just business. This was his mother's ghost. He was fighting the Rinaldis, but he was also fighting his own father, his own past, and I, and his son, were now standing right in the middle of that war. The confession about his mother hung in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. Luca stood by the window, a silhouette against the first, faint, gray light of dawn. The house was utterly silent, as if holding its breath. Then the world exploded. It was not one sound, it was a dozen sounds at once. The deep, guttural roar of multiple heavy engines right outside the gates, the unmistakable, sickening crunch of the main gate collapsing, a chorus of angry, male shouts. And then the power died. The entire house plunged into absolute blackness. The air purifiers, the soft nightlights, the digital clocks, everything went silent. The emergency lights in the hallway clicked on, casting a terrifying, pulsing red glow. Aisha, Luca's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a roar of pure command. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing me by the arm. The safe room, now. Before I could even move, the first floor erupted, the sound of gunfire, a rapid, popping barrage that was not a warning. It was an invasion. It was followed by the catastrophic, musical shatter of the massive, 2-story glass wall overlooking the lake. The wind and the cold air of the lake rushed in. A physical, howling presence. Luca shoved me toward the hallway. Go, go. Do not stop for anything. I did not need to be told. I scooped Nico from his crib, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grab the go bag. Nico, ripped from sleep, took a deep, shuddering breath and began to scream. I ran into the red-lit hallway. Luca was right behind me, but he did not follow me to the safe room. He veered left toward the main staircase that led down into the battle. Luca! I screamed over the sound of shouting and breaking glass. Get him safe, he bellowed back, and then he was gone, a shadow disappearing into the chaos. I ran. My feet pounded on the thick carpet. The safe room was just ahead. The steel panel was still open from the last time. I fumbled for the keypad, my fingers slipping on the buttons. A new sound. Boots. Heavy, pounding steps coming up the service stairs at the end of the hall. Not Luca's men. They were already deployed. This was someone else. The keypad chimed. The thick steel door hissed open. I threw the go bag inside, my heart trying to claw its way out of my chest. A man appeared at the end of the hall. He was dressed in black tactical gear, a ski mask covering his face, a weapon held low and ready. He saw me. He saw the baby in my arms. He raised his weapon. I had maybe 1 second. I did not think, I just reacted. My hand went to the go bag, still slung on my shoulder. I grabbed the first thing I touched. It was the small, green, emergency oxygen canister. It was heavy. Mrs. Alvarez's voice, from weeks ago in the kitchen, a quiet lesson in survival. Men like this, they expect fear. They expect you to cower. Surprise is your only weapon. Hey, I screamed, my voice cracking. The gunman paused, confused by the challenge. I threw the oxygen tank at his head with all the strength I had. I did not aim to hit him. I aimed to make him flinch. He did. He instinctively ducked, raising an arm to block the heavy projectile. The tank clanged harmlessly against the wall, but it had bought me the time I needed. I scrambled into the safe room, pulling Nico tight against my chest. I slammed my palm onto the massive red button. The gunman looked up. Realizing his mistake, he lunged, shouting. But the steel door was already in motion. It shut with a heavy, pneumatic hiss, followed by the definitive, echoing thunk, thunk, thunk of the magnetic bolts shooting into place. I collapsed against the sealed door, my entire body shaking, gasping for air. We were safe. We were locked inside a soundproof steel box. Nico's screams were deafening in the small, enclosed space. He was terrified by the darkness, The noise, my panic. His small body was rigid. "It is okay," I panted, my voice unrecognizable. "It is okay, baby, we are safe." My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled for the light switch. A single, low-level light clicked on, illuminating the small, windowless room, the bench, the water bottles, and the monitor. On the wall was a small, black-and-white screen, a security feed. My blood went cold. It was pointed at the main staircase. I saw him, Luca, when he was not dressed for battle. He was still in the black t-shirt and sweatpants he had slept in. He had a handgun in his right hand, and he was crouched behind a marble pillar at the top of the U-shaped stairs. Below him, I could see them. At least 4 men, maybe 5, dressed like the one I had seen, moving up the stairs, using the banisters for cover. They were exchanging fire. The sound of the guns, silent to me, was deafening on the small, tinny speaker. Luca was alone. He was holding the 3rd floor by himself, and he was buying me time. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. Nico's cries were turning into panicked, gasping wheezes, the stress, the sound, the panic. He was struggling to breathe again. "No, no, no," I begged. I tore open my shirt, my fingers clumsy. I did not have milk. I was too terrified. But I needed skin. I put his bare chest directly against mine, wrapping the blanket around both of us. "It is okay," I sang, the word a hysterical vibration. "I got you. I got you. Mama's got you." I started to sing. It was the only other thing I could do. A deep, old gospel song my mother used to sing when the power went out, when the sirens got too close in our old neighborhood. A song about rescue, about water, about peace. My voice was a terrified, off-key warble, but it was a sound. It was human. Nico's wheezing did not stop, but it did not get worse. He burrowed against me, his tiny, cold nose pressing into my skin. Care. This was strength. This was my weapon. I looked back at the monitor. Luca was hit. I saw him flinch, a bullet grazing his left hand, the one that was already bandaged. He did not cry out. He just switched the gun to his wounded hand and kept firing with his right. He was protecting the nursery. He was protecting us. Matteo. Where was Matteo? The monitor only showed the stairs. Then, sound from below, a different kind of gunfire. Heavier, automatic. Matteo. He was leading a counterattack from the 1st floor. He was coming up from behind them. The men on the stairs were caught. The Rinaldis. Their plan was so obvious now. This was not a negotiation. They were not here to talk. They were here to take me, and to take Nico, to get the leverage they needed to force Luca to sign the port deal. My pocket, the burner phone, Detective Walsh. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pull it out. I still had a signal. The safe room must have had its own small, independent cell booster. I dialed the number. "Walsh," she answered on the first ring, her voice wide awake. "They are here." I gasped, my eyes glued to the screen, where Luca was now descending the stairs, firing, moving toward his men. "The Rinaldis, they are in the house. They are trying to take the baby." "Why, where are you?" she demanded. "Are you safe?" "Safe room, 3rd floor. Luca is hurt." I was babbling. "Listen, you were right. They want the port, but they are not just here." I remembered the phone call. The call I overheard between Luca and Matteo. Rinaldi is moving product. He needs a new route. "He has a warehouse," I whispered, my mind racing. A secondary location. I heard Matteo say it, near the river. Calumet. A red brick building. That is where they must be holding them. The people they are trafficking. That is their main operation. They are stretched thin tonight. They sent their best men here. For us. Go there. Go there now. I did not know if it was right. I was just guessing. I was throwing another oxygen tank, but this time into the whole city. "On my way," she said, and the line went dead. I watched the screen. The fight was over. It was brutal and fast. Luca was standing at the bottom of the stairs, swaying slightly. Matteo was at his side, shouting into a radio. The intruders were down. I sat on the bench, my body a single, resonating tremor. Nico was finally quiet. just small, shuddering breaths against my chest. A full 10 minutes passed, an eternity. Then the knock. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. I moved, my limbs stiff, robotic. I hit the red button. The bolts retracted. The door hissed open. Luca was standing there, and he was covered in sweat and plaster dust. His left hand was wrapped in a bloody, makeshift rag. His face was a mask of pure, primal exhaustion. We just stared at each other. We were alive. The house was a war zone. The air smelled of gunpowder and the cold, wet lake. Shouts echoed from the first floor. Luca stepped into the safe room. He looked at me and then at his son, who was asleep, safe, against my skin. He did not touch me. He did not cry. He just leaned his head against the cold steel wall of the safe room. His eyes closed. "They wanted to force the port deal," he whispered, his voice destroyed. "They were going to take you, both of you." "I know," I said. He opened his eyes. They were not the eyes of a boss. They were just the eyes of a man pushed past his absolute limit. "I need you," he said. The words were raw, torn from him. It was not romantic. It was not a plea. It was a fact. Nico needs you. This whole damn city, they want to starve us. They want to scare us. They want to take everything. He looked at me, his gaze desperate and terrifyingly clear. "I will not let them." I looked at his hand. The rag was already soaked through. "You're bleeding," I said, my voice flat. My own shock was setting in, making me practical. I sat him down on the bench. I grabbed the first aid kit from the go bag. My mother had been a nurse. She had taught me to be calm, to handle blood. I unwrapped the rag. It was a clean shot, through the fleshy part of his palm. Ugly, but lucky. I did not say anything. I just took the antiseptic, the sterile needle, the surgical thread. I poured the stinging liquid over the wound. He did not even flinch. He just watched my face. As I pushed the needle through his skin, pulling the first stitch tight. Our roles were laid bare. He had just protected this house with violence. I was protecting his son with my body. And now, I was stitching him back together. We were saving each other. An hour later, the house was full of police, not Walsh, local police, handling the break-in. Matteo was dealing with them, his face like stone, spinning a story about a robbery gone wrong. I was in the nursery, which was untouched, when Matteo came in. We got a call," he said, his voice strange. He looked at me with new, confused respect. "While we were cleaning up, the cops, a separate unit, hit a Rinaldi warehouse on the Calumet River. A massive trafficking bust. They found 24 people in a container. They arrested everyone." My heart leaped. It had worked. "And they caught her," Matteo said, a strange satisfaction in his voice. "She was at the main gate, in her car, watching, waiting for her men to bring you out." "Who?" I asked, rocking Nico, though I already knew. "Elena Rinaldi," he said, "the head of the snake." He paused, looking at me. She used to be Luca's friend when they were kids, before her family and his separated. She knew the layout. She knew the blind spots. She knew he had a son. Elena, a woman. She was the one behind the blogs, the memes, the attack. A childhood friend turned rival, who knew exactly which wound to pour the salt in. The days that followed were a blur of cold efficiency. The mansion was not a home. It was a fortress being methodically rebuilt. The shattered floor-to-ceiling glass wall was replaced, not with more glass, but with a seamless, transparent polymer that Matteo assured everyone was bulletproof up to a .50 caliber round. Security teams swarmed the property, installing new sensors, higher fences, and a biometric system that required my thumbprint to even enter the third-floor hallway. I was no longer just a resident. I was part of the security protocol. The outside world was a different kind of explosion. My anonymous tip to Detective Walsh, combined with the Rinaldi's failed and very public assault, had brought the entire syndicate crashing down. The warehouse bust on the Calumet River was the largest human trafficking case in Chicago history. Elena Rinaldi's face was plastered across every news channel. Her cold, beautiful features a mask of fury as she was led away in handcuffs. The data I had provided, a guess born of desperation, had unspooled a thread that led to dozens of shell companies, implicating city officials and port authorities. But the media, in its relentless hunger, found an even better story. They found me. I do not know who leaked my name, or the picture from my first day, a grainy shot of me in my gray uniform, but the headline was everywhere. Housemaid saved the air. I was catapulted from anonymity into a bizarre, terrifying spotlight. I was a folk hero. I was a gold digger. I was a brave protector. I was a classless interloper. The same blogs that had posted racist memes of me now hailed me as some kind of working-class Joan of Arc. I was caught between public adoration and intense, invasive scrutiny. Photographers with long lenses were camped out on boats on Lake Michigan, trying to get a single shot of me through the new bulletproof windows. I stopped leaving the house. The third floor, once my prison, then my sanctuary, now felt like the only safe place on earth. 2 weeks after the attack, Luca summoned me to his study. The room was clean, the smell of gunpowder and fear long gone, replaced by the familiar scent of espresso and old books. He was sitting behind his desk, his left hand, the one I had stitched, resting on the polished wood. A faint, puckered red scar was the only sign of the wound. "You are not safe," he said, his voice flat. It was a statement of fact. "You will never be safe. Not really. They are gone, but there will always be others. You are tied to me now. You are tied to my son." I stood before his desk, my hands clasped in front of me. "I know. Matteo has drawn up a new contract." He pushed a thick, leather-bound document across the desk. "It is not a retainer. It is a lifetime protection agreement. You are, for all legal purposes, under the permanent protection of the Belandi family. This is binding." He then pushed a second, thinner folder toward me. "This is your new position. You are no longer a consultant. You are the pediatric care manager for the Belandi estate. The salary is listed. It is obscene." He said the word without humor. "It also includes a full scholarship to the university of your choice for you to complete your registered nurse license. Should you choose to do so, your duties will be to care for Nico and to stay alive." I looked at the papers. It was a life, a golden cage, but a life nonetheless, a future. "Thank you, Mr. Belandi," I said, my voice quiet. "Luca," he said, his voice rough. He stood up. "My name is Luca. I think you have earned the right." I nodded, took the folders, and left. Later that afternoon, as I was rocking Nico in the nursery, Mrs. Alvarez came in. She did not say a word. She just came over to the chair, her face full of a quiet, solemn emotion I could not read. She took my right hand. She pressed something small, cold and heavy into my palm and closed my fingers around it. I opened my hand. It was a ring. It was old, a simple gold band set with a single, small, dark stone. "This was my mother's." "Mrs." Alvarez whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "It was her mother's. It is the ring of the women who keep the family alive, the women who do the real work." She patted my hand, her own rough with a lifetime of labor. "You are one of us now. Aisha, you are famiglia." My own tears came then, hot and sudden. It was not a contract, or a salary, or a bodyguard. It was this small, worn-out ring from a woman who saw me, who understood the sacrifice, the care. This was acceptance. The next day, I made a call. I used my new secure phone to call my old landlord in the South Side. I still had the apartment, still paid the rent, though I had not been back in weeks. I told him I was sending a check, a very large check. Then I called a lawyer, a community organizer I knew from my old neighborhood. "I want to start a fund," I said, my voice firm. "I am wiring an initial amount. I want it to be called the Nova Fund." I spent the next hour explaining. It would be a small, hyper-local foundation. It would provide free breast milk from a certified bank to mothers on the South Side who could not produce their own. It would buy hospital-grade respiratory equipment, oxygen monitors, and air purifiers for low-income families with newborns. The exact things I knew would have helped Nova. The exact things that had saved Nico. I hung up, a fierce, clean joy cutting through the fear. My grief had a new shape. It was not a hole anymore. It was a structure. I was taking the Belandi blood money, the hazard pay, and I was turning my pain into care, into something that could keep other mothers from knowing my loss. A few days later, I was walking Nico down the second-floor hallway, trying to get him to sleep. Matteo was there, overseeing the installation of a new painting. He turned as I approached. He looked stiff, awkward. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice low. "Matteo," I replied, shifting Nico on my shoulder. I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly costing him. "I misjudged you. I saw you as a liability, a weakness. I was wrong." He looked at me, his scanner eyes no longer cold, but filled with a new, grudging respect. "You are not a liability. You are a fortress. You did not just save the boss. You saved this entire family from itself." He reached into his jacket pocket. He did not pull out a contract. He pulled out a small, laminated card. It just had a single word on it. Seraphim. A new internal call sign, he explained, handing it to me. For the highest security clearance, only me, Luca, and the head of this security detail have one. If you ever use it on any of our comms, it means drop everything. It means the air is in danger. This, I knew, was a gesture of trust deeper than any ring, more binding than any contract. He was giving me a key to the entire kingdom, a panic button that would bring the whole Belandi army running. I was no longer the help. I was the center. The house began to find a new rhythm, a rhythm of healing. The shouting was gone, replaced by the hum of construction, and then by quiet. One evening, I came out of the nursery and saw Luca and two of his men struggling. They were moving the massive black grand piano from the dark, unused music room. "Where are you putting it?" I asked. "Here," Luca said, gesturing to the main living area, the one with the new, bulletproof wall overlooking the lake. "It is too quiet in this house." That night, a new ritual was born. After Nico's 9 o'clock feeding, I would bring him downstairs. He would be sleepy, warm in his blanket. I would sit on the massive sofa, and Luca would sit at the piano. He would play, not the angry, dark chords I used to hear from the study. He played soft, simple melodies, old lullabies from his childhood in Sicily, things his nonna, his grandmother, had taught him. His hands, one scarred, moved over the keys with a surprising, gentle grace. We would just sit there, me, Nico, and him, no talking, just the music, the sound of the lake outside, and the quiet, steady breathing of a healthy child. We were three broken, shipwrecked people who had washed up on the same shore, and we were building a raft. I looked at him, his face softened by the dim light, his eyes closed as he played. I was not his employee. I was not his prisoner. I was here because I had chosen to stay. I had chosen to stand in the fire. I was here because of Nico, but a new, terrifying, and undeniable truth was blooming in my chest. I was also here because of him. I was falling for him, for this impossible, violent, gentle man, and I did not know what to do with it. This was not a fairy tale. He was a mafia boss, a killer, a man who lived in a world of shadows I could never truly understand. A week later, the first snow of the season fell. It was quiet, peaceful. The city was muffled, clean. Luca found me in the nursery, just standing by the window, watching the flakes drift down over the dark, churning water of the lake. Nico was asleep in his crib. "Aisha," he said, his voice soft. I turned. "Walk with me," he said. We bundled up, and for the first time, we left the house together, just the two of us. We walked out the back, onto the massive stone terrace, down the steps to the small, private beach. The wind off the lake was bitingly cold, but I felt strangely warm. We were surrounded by a perimeter of unseen, heavily armed men, but it felt like we were the only two people in the world. We stood at the water's new, icy edge. The snow was collecting on the sand. "I have not been out here since Isabella," he said, his voice quiet, the wind snatching at the words. "I hated this view. It was the last thing she saw." "It is beautiful today," I said, watching a flake land on his dark coat. He was silent for a long time. Then he turned to me. "I told you about my mother," he said, "how she was sold, how she was property. My father, he never loved her, he just owned her." He took a breath, his gaze intense. "That is not what this is. I do not want to own you. I do not want to trap you in a golden cage. Aisha, I want you to be free. The contract, the money, the scholarship, that is all for you. So you can leave. So you can build your own life whenever you want." My heart ached. He was giving me an out. "But I do not want you to," he whispered, and the words were torn from him, raw and honest. "I want you to stay, not for Nico, not because you owe me. I want you to stay for me." He reached into his pocket. He did not kneel. He did not make a grand gesture. He just stood in front of me, this impossible broken man, in the falling snow. He pulled out a ring. It was not a massive, flashy diamond. It was a ruby, a deep, dark, blood-red ruby, cut in an old style, surrounded by small, intricate gold leaves. "This was my Nonna's," he said, his voice thick. "She was not a wife. She was a partner. She ran Sicily with my grandfather. She was the one who taught me to play the piano. She was the one who told me love is not a contract. It is a battle. It is a choice, every single day." He held it out. "I'm not a good man. Aisha, I live in a world of darkness. But you are the first light I have seen in a very, very long time. You and Nico." He looked at me, his eyes full of a hope that was more terrifying than his anger. "You do not have to answer now," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I am asking, will you stay? Will you build this life with me? Will you be my wife?" I looked at the ring, I looked at his scarred hand, I looked at his face, and I thought of my choices. The South Side, the fear, the cold, or this dangerous, complicated, terrifying, and profoundly real warmth. I made my choice a long time ago, the night I walked up those stairs. "Yes," I whispered, "I will stay." It has been 1 year. I am standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, a place that was once my prison and is now simply my home. The wind off Lake Michigan is gentle today, carrying the scent of summer and the distant sound of the city. Nico is playing at my feet. He's 14 months old, sturdy and loud, and he chatters constantly, a chaotic and beautiful mix of English and the Sicilian dialect that Luca speaks to him. "Aqua," he says, his little finger pointing definitively at the massive expanse of blue water. "More." I laugh and rest a hand on my own belly. It is high and round, heavy with a new life, a daughter. She gives a strong, sudden kick, a sharp hello against my palm. My life is unrecognizable from that terrified, leaking, grieving woman who scrubbed floors just to pay medical bills. Those bills are long gone. But the work is not the Nova Fund, which I started with the first obscene check Luca gave me, is no longer a secret, desperate project. It is now an official pilot program, partnered with the largest public hospital in Chicago. The press had a field day with it. Mafia Millions Fund Public Health. One headline blared, the tone a perfect mix of confusion and grudging respect. They could not find the angle. They searched for the crime, the catch, the money laundering scheme. They found nothing. They found only invoices for hospital-grade respiratory equipment, payments to a certified milk bank, and salaries for 2 new lactation consultants on the south side. Luca Belandi's name was on a donor plaque in a hospital lobby, not on an indictment. It was a beautiful, strange, moral contradiction. The world outside, the system is not always so clean. I received a package last week, a simple, unmarked brown envelope. Inside, there was no threatening note, just a brief message from Detective Aaron Walsh. Figured you should know who really put the target on your son. Attached was a grainy security camera photograph. It was not a Rinaldi goon. It was not a jealous member of the house staff. It was a woman in scrubs, a nurse. I recognized her instantly. She'd been on Dr. Patel's team, one of the many specialists who had come through the house during those first terrible weeks. She had seen Nico's agonizing allergy. She'd seen my arrival. She'd seen the solution. And then she had sold that information to a Rinaldi-owned gossip blog for, as Walsh later told me, $500. I'd been so terrified of the monsters in the shadows, but the first betrayal, the one that put us all in the crosshairs, had come from the light. From a medical professional who had taken an oath, it was a cold, hard reminder that the lines between good and bad are blurry, no matter which side of the city you live on. I had to face the other side of that coin. Last month, I visited Elena Rinaldi. I went to the Federal Correctional Facility alone. Luca did not want me to go, but he did not stop me. He understood. She sat behind the thick, smeary glass, looking small and dull in her orange jumpsuit. The cold, sharp beauty she had possessed was gone, replaced by a hollow, simmering anger. She did not apologize. She just stared at me, her eyes dead. "So, you are the one, Toel," she said, her voice a flat, tinny sound over the speaker. "The miracle. The help who became a queen." I did not say anything. I just waited. "Do not look so smug," she sneered, leaning closer to the glass. "You think you won. You did not. You just changed masters. Women like us, Aisha. Women in this world of violent men. We only ever get 2 choices. We can be the victim, or we can be the witch." She smiled then, a thin, bitter expression that held no humor. "I chose to be the witch. You just got lucky, and they decided to call you a saint." I thought about that for a long time as I walked out of the prison, the heavy doors buzzing and clanging shut behind me. I stood in the sunlight, and I finally knew she was wrong. "There is a third choice," I whispered to myself. I chose to be a creator. I chose to build something. Our wedding was not a mafia spectacle. There were no strategic alliances, no merging of territories. It was held right here, on the terrace. As the sun went down and turned the lake to liquid fire, it was small, it was warm, it was our family of choice. Mrs. Alvarez stood next to me, her hand gripping mine, tears streaming silently down her face into a small lace handkerchief. Mateo, his face stiff with an emotion I had never seen him show, was Luca's best man. He held Nico, who was wearing a tiny, perfect black suit and who slept through the entire ceremony. Detective Aaron Walsh was there. She stood in the back, looking profoundly awkward in a dark blue dress, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand. She was, to everyone's confusion, a guest of honor. My other guests were the mothers, 3 women from the South Side, their babies healthy and cooing in strollers, all of them breathing easy on equipment paid for by the Nova Fund. It was an impossible, beautiful gathering. The cop, the consigliere, the housekeeper, the mothers from the hood, and the boss, all watching a former housemaid marry into a legacy. Later that night, Luca and I were alone on the balcony. Nico was finally asleep upstairs. The music was over. He held me from behind, his chin resting on the top of my head, his arms wrapped around me and our unborn daughter. "It is strange," I whispered, leaning back against his chest. "I never found out who really leaked the information about the Nova Fund. I wanted it to be anonymous. But that article, The one that embarrassed the hospital into partnering with us? I never knew where it came from. Luca was silent for a moment. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against my back. "It was my mother," he said, his voice quiet. I turned in his arms to face him, my heart stopping. "What, Luca, you told me? You do not know where she is." "I do not," he said, his eyes on the dark line of the horizon. "She stays hidden. She's been gone for 20 years. But she watches." He took a breath. Matteo tracked the initial leak. It came from an anonymous encrypted server in Switzerland. It was untraceable, but it came with a message only I could access. "What did it say?" I whispered. "It was just one sentence on," he said, his voice thick with an old, deep pain and a new understanding. It said, "It is time to choose a new legacy. Luca, stop hiding in the dark." I understood, in that instant, with a clarity that took my breath away. His mother, the woman who had been sold, who had run away to save herself. She had been watching him. She had seen him become a father. She had seen his first fumbling act of public care, the fund in my daughter's name. She had not exposed him to hurt him. She had exposed him to save him. She had forced his hand, pushing him out of the shadows, not with a gun, but with a press release. She had seen the light in him, the light I had seen, and she had forced him to show it to the world. She was not controlling him. She was liberating him from the cycle of violence his father had trapped him in. The very next day, the Chicago papers ran a new story. The main editorial, the one that ran on the front page, had a familiar headline. His next move surprised the entire city. But the article was not about the Rinaldi takedown or a new turf war. Luca had given his first ever public interview. He had announced his next project. He was using the seized Rinaldi assets and pouring tens of millions of dollars into a new public-private partnership with the city. He was building a new wing on the public hospital, a state-of-the-art center for maternal health, a certified breast milk donation bank, and a cutting-edge pediatric respiratory care unit. He showed me the plans that night, his scarred hand tracing the architectural drawings, and I saw the name, the one that was to be carved in marble over the glass entrance, the Nova and Isabella Center. My daughter and his wife, our grief, our loss, side by side, not buried in a graveyard but built into a foundation of care, standing tall in the middle of Chicago for everyone to see. I am standing here now, 1 year later. I see Luca walking toward me, holding a cup of tea, his face soft in the morning light. I see my son, laughing as he stacks his blocks. I feel my daughter, kicking, ready to join us. Elena Rinaldi was wrong. You do not have to be a victim or a witch. You can be a builder. We did not leave the darkness. Luca and I, we did not run from it. We just lit a lamp inside it. Thank you for listening to this story. I am so curious. Where are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button. It really helps this story get heard by more people.